Thank you for listening to the Luminous Recovery Yoga Podcast, hosted by Kari. The views and opinions expressed here are strictly those of the person who gave them. Take what you like and leave the rest. These views and opinions do not represent any specific 12-step program, only my experience, strength, and hope in recovering from the dis-ease of addiction and codependency. If you'd like to learn more, please visit my website at www.luminousrecoveryyoga.com. Hey there, friend. Thank you so much for joining me for the Luminous Recovery Yoga Podcast. I'm Kari, and I'm so happy that you are joining me for this episode today. Before we get going, I just want to say if you find this helpful, awesome, please always feel free to take what you like and leave the rest. This is just my experience, strength, and hope of living in a body on planet Earth at this time. And so if there are things that you find useful, awesome. And if there are things that don't resonate, also awesome. Just take what works and leave the rest behind. If you find that you would like more opportunities to dig into these kind of topics or to talk more about recovery, if you're new to that, or if you've been doing it for a long time and you want to try something new, consider joining me for Yoga of 12-Step Recovery. It's a really wonderful opportunity to explore topics in a new way that also includes a yoga practice. Yoga of 12-Step Recovery is a meeting that is half meeting, half yoga practice. And so you get an opportunity to really, I call it embodied understanding, where you get to explore a topic in your mind and in your heart and through your voice, if you choose to share, but then also what it might feel like to embody those principles on the mat. And there's something to me about learning how to embody principles on the mat that really, it's like a full, well-rounded understanding where it's not just an intellectual understanding. It's when I get to understand these things in my body. So if that's something you're interested in, please feel free to join me for Yoga of 12-Step Recovery. And you can find more about that on my website or email me if you're interested in learning more. So with that being said, let's move into today's topic. Today, I want to talk about listening. And I would say that if you would have asked me, let's say 7 years ago, because that was before yoga and recovery. If you would have asked me about 7 years ago if I was a good listener, I would have said definitely yes, I'm a great listener. And the truth is, I wasn't. I had no idea how to listen. It's kind of that common thing that we find in our culture where we're actually just waiting for our turn to speak. I would say that that's definitely something I practiced pretty heavily. And, it's one of those things where I think that listening is a virtue that we think we should be good at. So if we think we're a good friend or, we think we're doing all right in the world, of course we're going to think we're a good listener. And actually, I'm just going to speak for myself in that moment. Lots of we's in that last sentence. So if I'm going to speak for myself, I'll say, I believed that being a good listener was a good virtue to have, just like being honest. Like I would have said that I was an honest person. And the truth is, I wasn't honest at all. And it wasn't malicious. It wasn't a maliciousness. It was just that I didn't know how. And yet I thought I was a good person, and good people listen. Good people are honest. And so therefore I would have definitely told you that I was a good listener and that I was honest. And so, it wasn't that I was maliciously not listening. It's just that my head was so full that it was actually really hard just to focus in general. And I find that listening requires a certain level of focus. If I really want to listen to somebody, I have to be able to set aside my mental chatter to really get present with somebody. And really what I didn't have was presence. I didn't know how to be present. I was just very in my head and in my thinking. There was definitely a time in my life where I believed everything that I thought. So if you were talking to me, as much as I wanted to listen, I didn't really know how to listen. And I just didn't really know how to center my presence into one point. And so, right off the bat, that's what yoga taught me. Yoga taught me how to focus. It really started with drishti, focusing my eyes, and by learning how to just hold my focus to one point. And, that one point could be a spot on the wall. It could be something right in front of me. But ultimately, I learned how to focus. And then that bled into my ability to hold my focus with another person, my ability to look at somebody, to listen to what they're saying, and to be able to process that information, and also not how to feel the urge to fix them or change them or give unsolicited advice. So I thought that I was listening, but really I was just waiting for my turn to speak or waiting for the most brilliant thing that I could add to the conversation, but I wasn't listening. And I recognize now that I wasn't listening because now I feel like I have learned how to listen. And I think at the time I would have said, yeah, I know how to listen, but really I just know how to hear, right? Like there's a difference between hearing and listening, I think. So yeah, maybe I could hear, and hearing is a sense. Like hearing is, being able to actually take in sound, I think, in the most basic way. But truly I wasn't able to listen. So what contributed to my ability to learn how to listen? That's what I want to share in this episode today. So I learned how to listen, one, through my yoga practice, but also through attending recovery meetings. So if you've ever attended a recovery meeting, there's a certain amount of time, right? So the meeting might be 60 minutes or 90 minutes, and you are invited to speak for up to 5 minutes. So for a 90-minute to a 60-minute meeting, 5 of those minutes are for your talking or sharing. And the other, 55 to 85 minutes are listening. So you get your 5 minutes to share. And in your 5 minutes to share, you can share whatever you want. But for the other 85 to 55 minutes of the meeting, you are listening. And in that listening, what you begin to identify is that you are probably much more like other people than you realize. And that's actually what I really learned from listening, is that I can actually mainly identify with other people more than I think I do. There's this terminology that we have in recovery called terminal uniqueness. And that, is something that I think a lot of new people come in with, this idea that we are very unique and nobody will ever understand. And in that nobody will ever understand me, there tends to be this feeling of isolation, because if nobody understands me, then I just get to continue to have my own personal experience and feel like I'm alone. And so what I've learned through listening is that I'm actually not alone, that there are people who understand me, they hear me, they're listening to me, and they actually identify with what I have to say. And so I find that in a recovery meeting, I do a lot more listening. And that was actually where I started to really practice my listening skills. I started to listen to other people speak without the urge or even the ability to comment on what they're saying, to give advice, to give feedback, or really to give anything other than just my listening. And that was such a relief. Like as I'm saying it now, what I'm understanding is that it really took me off the hook, because there's this sense when I'm sharing or being in conversation with somebody that I'm supposed to do that I'm supposed to offer feedback or give back what they said or offer something. And so what I really learned in recovery is that I can just listen, and that I don't have to add to it. I don't have to fix it or change it or give advice. I could just listen. And the gift that I'm giving is my presence, that I'm just giving my witnessing. And in that witnessing, I could just hold somebody in space, like just hold space with a person, rather than this urge to offer something in return, which is what I was used to. I was used to having to respond or give something back or wait for my turn to speak. So really what I learned in recovery more than anything was how to listen and how to be in space with other people and share space without the urge to have to offer something back. But really my presence in that space was the offering. So learning to listen was a huge recovery lesson. And then the other way that I learned to listen, and again, these two practices developed alongside for me, yoga and recovery. So when I really think about where I learned how to listen, it was learning how to practice without looking at the yoga teacher. So in the method of yoga that I practice, it is a value, I would say, that we use our verbal skills rather than using our body to teach the poses. So in other words, when I'm teaching yoga, and if you ever take a yoga class with me, you'll find that I very rarely teach from the mat, meaning I'm not practicing the poses with the students. And so when I first learned how to practice yoga, I was in a studio that practiced this as a method where we don't teach from the mat. So the teacher was walking around and offering hands-on assists and using a lot of verbal cues in order to teach the class. And at first, I wasn't necessarily used to that. But then I got really used to it, and I suddenly learned that if I wasn't paying attention to what the teacher was doing, that I could actually listen a lot better. And if I needed a demonstration, like I needed to see what was actually happening, I could usually look to the person next to me and see what they were doing and see if that, made any sense to me. So what I learned was that I could start processing information and listening to the teacher so that I could have an experience. And I found that if I wasn't looking at the teacher, then I had the opportunity to create drishti, to set my eyes and to really get focused. And I learned how to listen. Like I remember when I used to practice and the teacher would say, step your right foot forward, and I would step my left foot forward. I had no concept of like my body and space. We call this proprioception. I had very little proprioception. I just did not know where my body was. And so if the teacher would say, right foot forward, I would step my left foot forward, or they would say, anything, and I would do practically the opposite. So I learned that I actually didn't know how to take instructions very well. I was not very adept at listening and processing information and then acting on that information. And so what I found was that as I continued to practice yoga and listen to what the teacher was saying, that I was able to start processing information a lot better. And I now really, really believe that in this way of teaching, as I'm a yoga teacher now, I really believe in this way of teaching that what we're teaching is a divine listening, the ability to listen to what's happening and to listen to what's happening around you and process information without having to show it in my own body as a demonstration. And honestly, this really built up my skill set, my ability to listen. And so whenever I teach a new student, and I know that there's a hesitation about like, oh, you're not practicing too, I always really let them know that it's a gift. It's a gift to not practice with you. And you might not know that yet, but you will come to maybe understand if you stick with it, that by me not practicing with you on the mat, I'm actually allowing you to have your own experience and not cloud it by what I'm doing. Oftentimes I found that yoga teachers were much more like flexible or athletic, or even the way their body looked was much different from mine. And I would take that in as, well, if I don't look like them, then I can't do it. And really the gift of not practicing with my students is that it's not really about what I'm doing. It's about what they're doing. And so by removing my body as a demonstration, they start listening to themselves and what is right for them. And so by learning how to listen to the teacher and learning how to process information in that way, I started to really learn how to listen to myself and to listen for myself. And that was just a huge gift, to learn how to listen. The other way that yoga really helped me learn how to listen was through body sensation. And this is something, if you've ever practiced with me before, you'll know that I talk a lot about listening for sensation. Sensation is the language of the body. So the way that we learn how to listen for ourselves is through sensation. Our body is sending us signals through sensation. And when I first came to yoga, I had no idea how to listen for sensation. If I felt anything in my body, I was very uncomfortable. And there was a time when, I was really abusing food for a long time. And if I had any type of sensation in my body, I would translate that as, oh, I'm just hungry. And so I would eat food. And, that was really how I measured any type of sensation. If I felt any tingling in my belly, I would automatically think it was just because I was hungry. And so I would eat. And really what I've learned through the practice of learning about sensation is that my body's actually sending me all kinds of signals. And so oftentimes as the yoga teacher, we might say this very cryptic thing like, listen to what your body is saying. And if you don't have that relationship, well, how the hell do you know what your body is saying? And so I think that the primary way I learned how to listen to my body was through learning to listen for sensation. And now when I have a sensation in my body, I can be much more curious. Like, oh, is this a pain that I need to see a doctor for? Is this something that I need to stretch out? Or do I need medicine? And there's just a much larger sense of curiosity when I feel sensations in my body. I'm able to interact with sensations a lot more. And I can say that I learned how to do that through listening, through cultivating a practice of listening. And, there's listening for others, and there's listening for self. There's listening for the space and what's happening around me. And so I find that listening is really multi-layered, multi-tiered, that there's a much larger listening that's happening. And I'm listening sometimes for all of these things at once. Like, let's say I'm in a conversation with somebody and they're saying things that, I don't know, I start to feel in reaction to or feel uncomfortable about. So not only am I listening for them, but I'm also listening for myself. And so I find that learning how to listen, there's the internal listening, there's an external listening, and then there's a listening for the space in general or wherever I am, like learning how to listen for different signals or cues or about my environment. And so listening is something that I really cultivated through both my yoga and my recovery practice. So I'm curious about you. What is listening like for you? Where did you learn how to listen? And did you learn how to listen? And if you didn't learn how to listen, can that be okay? And can you identify that maybe this is an area in your life where you want to sharpen those skills? And what would it take? I have a friend and mentor. I'm going to give them a shout out, Stone. Stone actually teaches a method called Clara. And I'm not exactly sure what it fully stands for. It's an acronym, but it's basically about how to listen and communicate. And when you're listening to other people and you truly cultivate that spirit of listening, that you're able to respond and add in a lot better way. So if you want to listen or learn listening skills, please consider joining Stone for Clara. And that's actually going to be starting pretty soon. And I'll be in those practice sessions. Stone basically holds these practice sessions where you can practice listening and using this method called Clara. So if you're looking for different ways to learn about listening, this is something that you can cultivate. And you can look this up on Stone's website at findstonekarens.com. If you want that information, I will put that in the show notes. And you can also reach out to me for more information about that. And I can get you in touch with Stone. But Stone is actually a really great teacher of mine, someone who has taught me so much about listening and how to be present in the world. So if you're looking for some new way of experiencing listening and actually practice your listening, that's just one particular way that you can try. But you can also try showing up to a recovery meeting and seeing if that works. Or, see what happens if you start listening in yoga in that new way, where you stop focusing so much on what's happening around you and you really focus on processing the information through your listening. So those are just some ideas. Those are just some ways that you might consider listening as a skill, something that you can develop deeper, and that when you learn how to listen to others, you're also practicing and learning how to listen for yourself and learning to listen for sensation in the body so that we know how to interact with ourselves better. So we're not just listening to others, we're listening for others, and we're listening for ourselves. So those are my thoughts on listening and how listening helps me in my day-to-day life, how it has cultivated a practice of curiosity for me, and just a few different ways that you might learn how to listen in a new and different way. So with that being said, we're going to transition to the mat, our embodied understanding. And I invite you, when we go over to the mat, to really listen for your breath. And that's what we'll focus on today, is listening for breath and learning how to listen for ourselves. And if you want to try a new challenge, you can try it today. Try not looking at the screen if you're watching this on YouTube, or if you're listening to this as a podcast. Just really notice what is in your listening when you are taking in instructions. So with that being said, let's take it to the mat. Hey there, welcome back. And here we are at the mat. So my invitation to you for the practice today is that you focus on listening to your breath and listening to the sensations in your body, and just start to notice what shows up for you. Also listening to the instruction and taking in all of those things at the same time. And that could really feel overwhelming at times. So just take it simple. This practice will be a simple practice and it won't be very long. So just a little bit of opportunity to gain that embodied understanding. So with that being said, let's begin in supine butterfly. Come to lie down on your back. Bring the soles of your feet to touch. Place one hand over your heart and one hand over your belly. And take a full breath. Allow your elbows to relax by your sides. And begin listening to the sound of your breathing. Notice what the breath sounds like and what it feels like. The rhythm and the pace. Make conscious contact with the sound of your breath. Lengthen your legs forward. Take your arms over your head. Take a full body stretch from front to back. Pull your knees to your chest. Place one hand on each knee and begin to make some circles with your low back into the floor. One direction and then the other direction. Listen. Keep your knees stacked over your hips, flex your feet. Take your flat palms and press them into your thighs. Press your palms into your thighs and your thighs back into your palms. And then just gently lift your head, neck, and shoulders off the floor and look up at the ceiling. You'll start to notice the sensations in the center of your body, in your core, maybe your legs. Just notice where you're feeling this intense sensation. Breathe in and out of your nose and listen for yourself. We're here for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Put your feet on the floor. Windshield wipe your knees back and forth. You can just let your arms rest. Come up to a seat. Place one foot in front of the other. Place your hands on your knees. Start by lifting your shoulders up to your ears and roll them down your back. And take a couple more shoulder rolls. And then switch to the opposite direction. Roll your shoulders forward. And start to move your head and your neck in some circles. And switch directions when it feels good. Keep listening for the sound of your breath. Bring your head back up to a neutral position. Drop your head over to the left. Stretch your right fingertips out and maybe even touch your right fingertips to the floor, just the fingertips. And keep dropping your head over to the left to create a nice long stretch in your right side neck, your shoulder, and down your right arm. Listen for your breath. Listen for the sensations. Now ground your whole right hand, put your palm on the floor, soften your right elbow, reach your left arm up, and then stretch your left fingertips over to the right. And if it feels good, you can look up. And slowly come back up to neutral and place your left fingertips on the floor. And now drop your head over to the right. And just your fingertips on the floor, tent your fingers, and you might walk your fingertips away to create a little more sensation in that left side neck and shoulder, the top of your arm. Listen for what you feel. Listen for how the sensation is landing in your body. And breathe. And now ground your whole left palm onto the floor. Reach your right arm up and stretch your right fingertips over to the left. Find a softness in your left elbow. And if it feels good, you can look up. And slowly come back up to neutral. Put your hands on your knees. I want you to imagine that you are a spatula and that you're making big circles by scraping the edges of a bowl. So you are the spatula and you're scraping the edges of a bowl. And so start to move in some really big circles, like you were just scooping the outside of this bowl. Whatever's in that bowl, we don't know, but you are the spatula scooping. And so just make some really big circles, and you might involve your head and your neck. And when it feels good, you'll switch directions. And listen for your breath. Listen for what feels good. And you might switch directions again. You might slow down in some areas or linger in one particular spot that feels nice. Just listen for what is needed. Listen for where you can contribute to the sensations that you feel in your body. And then slowly sit back up to neutral. Extend your left leg forward. Pull your right foot to the inside of your right thigh. Reach your arms up over your head. And hinge forward to reach for your left foot. If you can't reach your foot, just catch your calf or your ankle, whatever you can reach for today, and gently pull your chest towards your toes. And gently sit back up. Straighten your right leg, pull your left foot in, reach your arms up, and reach for your right foot. And gently draw yourself in. Slowly come back up to a seat. Pull your right foot back in, come to a simple seat. Place your hands back on your thighs or your knees. Sit up tall. And take a few deep breaths. In and out of your nose. Listening for the sound of your breath. Listening for the still, quiet voice inside. And just notice. Notice yourself. Notice anything happening around you, any sounds. Listen for any sensations that you're feeling in your body. And bring your palms to touch at the center of your chest. And just take this final moment and notice how you feel. You don't have to call it anything, name it, or judge it. But just listen and notice. Pull your thumbs to the center of your forehead and bow your head towards your heart. In honor of you and me and this practice that we share, I bow to you, dear friend, and say namaste. I hope you enjoyed this practice and this episode, and please join me for next week's episode of the Luminous Recovery Yoga Podcast. Thank you for sharing this space with me. I hope to see you again soon. Thank you for listening to the Luminous Recovery Yoga Podcast. If you'd like to support the show, please consider joining my Patreon or leaving a comment and review if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or YouTube.